this is Phil Gibbs from OpenMake Software, and in this video we're going to show you some of the highlights of Release Engineer 7.7, our spanking new release. 7.7 contains a whole bunch of new features and some enhanced reporting and some nice new look and feel. So the first thing we'll do is we'll look at the Assigned Environments tab for an application. And you may recall that in the original 7.6 and prior versions of Release Engineer, the pending deployments for an application version were presented in a table, similar to the table you see at the top there, where the current environment and current version is listed. This was shown in a list view. In 7.7, that's still pulled from all the different environment calendars, but now it's presented as a sort of Gantt chart and much easier to read. We break that down by the domain in which the environment is presented, so we can see in this case sit, UAT and prod, and the fact that we're overdue and the fact that it hasn't been deployed into this particular environment. You see it was due to be deployed into SITENV1 and it hasn't been, so that's flagged in orange. So you've got a view there of seeing where the application version is due to be deployed at an environment level, and it immediately flags when this has not happened. So that gives you a much better view. That if you click on an application version, that gives you the results for the specific app. If you click on the parent app, that will show you for all the different versions of the application. At the moment, we've only got version 2 due to be deployed into different environments. And we also, which is an enhancement for 7.7, we actually pull that out for a release as well. So if the application version is part of a release, then that's also presented on this chart, so that we know when the release is due to go into production. That actually wasn't possible in 7.6. You had to go looking for each individual release and do it from there. So much better. So then we've got the ability to connect defect tracking systems or change request systems to individual applications and components, and that now lives on the change request tab. Now, what you can do with this is you can attach change requests from tools such as Bugzilla or GitHub or Jira at the moment. You can connect those to applications and components. And what that gives you is the ability to track change requests on particular applications or components. Now we're looking at it from an application point of view here, and you can see that these change requests are actually listed against individual components. Now, you can go straight to that component. We'll just go to IT Guys DB and look at the change requests in there. And you can see we've got 2 change requests, 140 and 145. And they are these are hyperlinks. So if I click on those, it'll go and open it up. And in this case, it's GitHub. You can also have different change requests, different change request systems being used at different components. So we've got the database one is using GitHub. This one is using Jira, the application. And so if you have two different teams developing different components, they can use their own change request tracking tool, right? So we don't insist on one tool being used across the whole application. Individual component development teams can use their own tools if that's what's required. At the top here, you get the usual burn down chart, so we can see as things are added, the chart obviously grows in height, and as the status changes, the dark area grows downwards to indicate that the change request has been closed. Actually, we do a regular poll, so you don't have to push from the change request tracking tool. Once it's set up in Release Engineer, that polls regularly to see whether the status is still the same, and if it's changed status, it'll update Release Engineer automatically. So you don't have to actually do a install anything to do a push or anything like that from the tracking system. Once you've attached a tracking tool, you can add change requests manually just by clicking the plus button. That will list you all the open change requests, and then you can just select which ones you want and click OK, and it will add it automatically. So you can do that at a component level, as we're seeing here. You can, if you look at this from an application point of view, you can see that all of that is pulled together. So we collate all that information from across different tools. So here we're using GitHub, here we're using Jira, but we know what status each one is referring to, whether it be open, in progress, or closed. We categorize it appropriately, and so here you can see the burn down chart operating across multiple change request tools. So from an application point of view, you can see the number of outstanding change requests for an individual application, and you can do that by pulling in the change requests for the underlying components. Now that gives us the ability to bundle that together into a release. So if I look at a release now, and you'll see this release has got 3 applications, as was it, Fizz App, Game of Life, and version 2 of IT Guys. Now, in the previous versions of Release Engineer, you could assemble a release and make it up of out of however many application versions you wanted, and deploy that release or schedule that release to be deployed against an environment calendar. And that was pretty much it. That was the end of what you could do with the release in 7.6. Well, in 7.7 we can bring those change requests together. So we can now pull all the change requests for the underlying applications. So when you look at the release, you can see how many change requests are outstanding, how many are closed, and that's across all the applications that are forming that release. So at a glance, that gives you a much better indication about the state of play of the release. What you can also do with this information now is to put a planner together. So we've got a new planner tab as well, and if you click on the planner tab, this brings the Gantt chart that we saw earlier into play. So that shows you when the individual applications that make up this release are due to go into their respective environments. So you can see that we've got, this is going to go into SIT-ENV1, and then it goes into UAT-ENV2. IT Guys 2 was supposed to go into SIT-ENV1. You remember that was overdue, and so we get it highlighted on this display as well, and it's due to go into UAT-ENV1 at that point there. So not only can we see when individual applications are due to go into their individual testing and environments on their way into production, but we can also show the number of outstanding change requests. So here we can see that we've got 4 open change requests still against FIS app. IT Guys version 2 has got 3 change requests in total, but 2 of them have been closed. And Game of Life is 2 open and 2 closed. So a combination of the Gantt chart and the open and closed change requests gives you a very good indication about where this release is looking. And of course, all of this stuff is hyperlinked, so you can go just click straight from there and go straight to the calendar for that particular environment to move things around, essentially. So you can drag and drop and move those events around in order to do the planning properly. But this was always traditionally very hard to do in 7.6 and prior releases. This has been is much more enhanced and gives you a much better view of how your release is looking, and gives you the ability to plan that release based on the individual applications that are forming that release. And if you want to take applications out of that release, this gives you the a much better view as to which applications will probably not make that release. What we've also added is the ability to create build engines. and add build engine jobs into individual components. So we've now got individual build engines, which typically would be a Jenkins CI tool, and within there you can link individual build jobs to individual projects within a Jenkins CI server. Now, what that gives you the ability to do is to then link those build jobs back into individual components, and so we can track the builds to individual components as they're performed. By looking at a build job, I can look at all the builds that have been done. I can click on a build, and that will pulls the information straight from Jenkins. So we don't store that. That information you see there is being pulled directly from Jenkins when we click on it. Similarly with the general tab, gives us the date and time of the build and the total duration and the like. But if it's been deployed, we'll know about it, and we can have a look at the deployed service tab. Now that is useful because in the 7.6 and prior releases, the Jenkins plugin that we had for Release Engineer would simply tell Release Engineer to deploy what had just been built. So essentially you could do a build and tell Release Engineer to deploy that build automatically, and it would go away and do that for you. What we've got now with the new plugin is the ability just to tell Release Engineer that a build has been done. And that will allow us to track changes to those to that component. So if I look at the builds, we're looking at a parent application here, so we're showing all the builds. You can see that these are the individual build numbers that have been performed for this particular component. So if I look at the component, I look at the general tab, you'll see that we've linked the build job to that component. So when Jenkins does a build, we tell Release Engineer, that a new build has been done, and we track that build against the component. Now, what you don't want to do is create a new version of the component every time there's a build, because the build is going to get done potentially every time there's a change to the source code, and that source code is checked in. That's the whole point of a CI server. So you don't necessarily want to create a new version of the component because A, it might not get deployed, it might not have to be deployed, and B, there'll just be hundreds of these things, right? So we generally only create a new version of the component if that component is associated with an approved application. So every time the component is rebuilt, we check to see whether the component association, to see whether the application has been approved. And if the application is approved, then we'll create a new version of the component. So this happens automatically, and you can see that we've got the build numbers for version 1, the build numbers for version 2, and the build numbers for version 3 sitting right there. And by looking at that, we can see which build number has been deployed to which environment, and which server within that environment. So you can see that we've extended the model now, so we can see that this deployment 2261 has gone off to dev-env1. 2202 went off to UAT env1, but this build number tells you the build that was associated. So when the build is done in Jenkins, we track that, so we know which build is associated with its component. But when that component is deployed, we know which build it was that was deployed as well. So we can track the changes all the way through from the original Jenkins CI run all the way through to where it's been deployed to. If I look at build 155, again, that's pulling straight from Jenkins, but I can click on the deployed service tab and see where that build has gone. So that build was associated with version 1 of IT Guys app component, and it's been delivered to OM server 1 and FizzApp server 1 by those deployment IDs. And I can go and open up those deployments as well and see all the files that were deployed in the typical way they always could. The deployment log looks a bit tidier now, but we've also added a feedback loop onto this, and change requests. So the change request tells you the change request IDs that were form part of the components or applications that were deployed. So you can see what was fixed or should have been fixed as part of this deployment. And the feedback loop extends that to show you what has been deployed and also what caused that deployment to happen. So here, looking at this, you can see build 155 that we talked about was associated with IT Guys App 1, which was a component. That component itself was associated with IT Guys, the application version 1. So we've got a version of a component and a version of an application. The application was what was deployed. The application was actually deployed to devenv1. Within devenv1, this component got targeted to the development server within that environment. So that's our endpoint that component actually got deployed to. And that's came as a result of build 155. We can also track those change requests because we know that change requests were associated with a particular component. So we've got CR140 and 145 were associated with the database component, and that database component also ended up on OM Dev Server. So this feedback loop gives you all the information you require to know what's been targeted onto a particular environment and server. You notice the dotted line there, that says Tomcat v7. There's a dotted line going off to OM Dev Server. The reason that's dotted is because this didn't form part of this deployment. That is an infrastructure component and it was already present on that target server. So it wasn't required to be deployed. So it didn't form part of this deployment. But in the feedback loop, we show that association, just so you know all the components that make up the application that was deployed. The solid line shows you what was actually deployed, and the dotted line says it's an association, but it wasn't actually deployed. That interface that we talked about earlier to do with Jenkins also can track the commit ID for Git and Subversion. So if you're using Git or Subversion as a SCM tool, we can take the commit point from that, and that will then feed into the build number as well. So give you so you can go back essentially to your SCM tool and see the commit that caused that build to be performed. And from there, you could even go back and look at the individual source code. So we can track source code changes through the commit, through the build, to the component, and on all the way to our endpoint. So very, very valuable information that we know every aspect of that deployment, all the way back through to the source code that generated it. So if you've got, if you're looking at an environment, maybe there's a problem with the environment, or you want to know what's changed, you can see that the deployment that has been done, and from there you can open the deployment up and go all the way back to the source that originally caused that deployment to happen. So that's in essence all the highlights of 7.7. There's a lot more in there. Things have been tidied up and beautified. There are tools to allow you to compare environments and servers to see what's changed over time and stuff like that, which is all very nice. I recommend you have a download and have a play. But that is in essence the highlight of the 7.7 release. Thank you very much for watching, and bye-bye.
Thank you for viewing our recorded demo. For more information, you can contact us at request-info@openmakesoftware.com. You can also visit our website at www.openmakesoftware.com for white papers and other demos on Release Engineer and Meister, our DevOps solutions.